Histobiograph.
She ruled for 44 years, but her final act was a secret no one expected. When Queen Elizabeth I died, her advisors found a letter hidden deep among her belongings. It wasn't official. It wasn't political. It was heartbreakingly human. It was from a man she once loved, Robert Dudley. And in her own handwriting, she had marked it. His last letter. They thought she died a proud, untouchable monarch. But this letter revealed something else entirely. That even the Virgin Queen had a wound that never healed. So who was Elizabeth I, really? A warrior queen? A political mastermind? Or just a daughter who grew up in betrayal? A woman trapped by her own crown? If you think you know the story of England's most famous queen, think again. Because this isn't the tale told in textbooks. This is the story hidden in her heart, born from scandal, raised by shadows. Elizabeth Tudor was never meant to be queen. She was born in scandal. Her mother and Boleyn was executed by her father, King Henry VIII, when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. One day she was a princess, the next, a bastard. She grew up in the shadows of court, where survival meant silence and love meant danger. At age 12, she was already translating books into Latin, French, and Italian, just to earn a sliver of her father's approval. By 14, she was enduring the advances of an older man, Thomas Seymour, who should have protected her. Instead, he tickled her, tore her clothes, and left emotional scars that would never quite fade. And through it all, she watched. She learned. Elizabeth wasn't handed power. She carved her identity in secret rooms. Through whispers, through pain. By the time she wore the crown, she had already survived a dozen traps set by kings, stepmothers, lovers, and fate itself. But what shaped her most wasn't what she gained. It was what she lost again and again. A letter buried in silence. After Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, her advisors searched through her private belongings. Among the silks and state papers, they discovered something peculiar. A letter, aged and folded tightly, buried beneath the floorboards of her private chamber. It wasn't addressed to a foreign power, nor was it political in nature. It was personal. It was from Robert Dudley, her lifelong companion, rumored lover, and the man she never married. On the back, in Elizabeth's own handwriting, were just 4 words. His last letter to me. That moment, quiet, devastating, offered a glimpse into a woman history has tried to armor in myth. To the world, she was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the unshakable monarch who defeated the Spanish Armada and ushered in England's golden age. But behind that crown, behind the portraits and speeches and lace, was a woman who kept love locked away in a drawer. And the story of how she got there, how scandal, survival, and sacrifice shaped her reign, is one that even her fiercest admirers rarely understand. This is not just the tale of a queen. It's the untold story of the girl who became one. Step by step, queen by queen. After her mother's execution, Elizabeth's life became a revolving door of new stepmothers, each one shaping her childhood in ways she couldn't control. Just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's death, her father married Jane Seymour. Jane gave Henry the son he desperately wanted, Prince Edward, and then died in childbirth. Next came Anne of Cleves, a political match Henry quickly annulled. Then Catherine Howard, Elizabeth's teenage cousin, who was later executed for adultery. Finally, there was Catherine Parr. Unlike the others, Catherine was kind. She encouraged Elizabeth's education. She read with her, taught her languages, treated her as more than just a forgotten child of a disgraced queen. For a while, it seemed Elizabeth had found something close to a mother. But peace was short-lived. When Henry VIII died, Catherine Parr married a new man, Thomas Seymour, the king's brother-in-law. And that's when things began to turn dark again. Because Seymour didn't see Elizabeth as a daughter. He saw her as something else. Something vulnerable. Something he could take. The predator in the palace. Thomas Seymour was 40. Elizabeth was just 14. When she moved into the home he shared with Catherine Parr, his behavior quickly crossed lines. He crept into her room at dawn. He tickled her under the covers. Sometimes, he even sliced her gowns open while she was wearing them. And Catherine Parr? She didn't stop him. Once, she even held Elizabeth down while Seymour tore her dress apart, laughing. Historians still debate her motives. Jealousy? Denial? Or a desperate attempt to keep her husband entertained? Whatever the reason, When Catherine discovered Seymour and Elizabeth in a compromising embrace, she sent the young girl away immediately. Months later, Catherine died in childbirth. And Seymour? He went right back to pursuing Elizabeth. But this time, the royal court had had enough. They arrested Seymour for treason, accusing him of trying to marry Elizabeth and take control of the throne. He was executed in 1549. Elizabeth didn't speak at the trial. She didn't write to him afterward. But the lesson lingered. Even silence can protect you. Sisters by blood, enemies by faith. In 1553, Elizabeth's half-brother Edward VI died without an heir, plunging the kingdom into chaos. Although Elizabeth and her older sister Mary were both next in line, Edward had named someone else, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor. A teenager, a Protestant puppet, Mary, fiercely Catholic, rallied her supporters. Elizabeth, careful and quiet, waited. Lady Jane Grey ruled for just 9 days. When Mary took the throne, Elizabeth stood beside her, smiling, applauding, loyal, at least on the surface. But underneath, old wounds simmered. Mary had never forgiven Elizabeth for being Anne Boleyn's daughter. She didn't even recognize her as a true princess. Their differences went beyond blood. Mary had been raised in the old world, Catholic, traditional, obedient. Elizabeth was born of revolution, Protestant, sharp-tongued, independent. Still, Elizabeth stayed close, too close. Because when rebellions flared across the kingdom, Mary pointed fingers. And the first person she suspected was her own sister. The Tower's shadow. In 1554, Elizabeth's life hung by a thread. After a Protestant uprising challenged Queen Mary's reign, Elizabeth was accused of conspiracy. Mary, now called Bloody Mary for her brutal persecution of Protestants, didn't hesitate. She had Elizabeth arrested and sent to the Tower of London. It was the same cold stone fortress where her own mother, Anne Boleyn, had awaited execution. For 3 terrifying months, Elizabeth sat in the shadow of the axe, interrogated, watched, abandoned. Every creak of the floorboards, every clink of chains, a reminder that at any moment, her life could end. Mary's advisors whispered poison. As long as Elizabeth lives, your throne will never be safe. And yet, Elizabeth survived, not by fighting, but by mastering the art of stillness. She wept in silence. She denied everything. She played the part of the obedient sister, flawlessly. And finally, with no hard evidence against her, she was released, exiled to the countryside. Watched, but alive. It was a test of power, and Elizabeth passed with quiet, calculated brilliance. The Orphan Queen. In 1558, Queen Mary died, childless, broken, and unloved by the people she once ruled with fire, and in a twist of fate that stunned the world. The girl who was once labeled illegitimate, imprisoned, and nearly executed, became Queen Elizabeth I of England. She was just 25. At her coronation, cheers echoed through the streets, not because the people loved monarchy, but because they loved her. And yet, behind the celebration was a terrifying reality. Elizabeth had inherited a fractured kingdom, religious division, foreign enemies, internal rebellion. Everyone expected her to marry. They assumed a king, or any king, would soon take her place beside the crown. But Elizabeth had other plans. She declared herself married not to a man, but to England itself. And with that single act of defiance, she redefined what it meant to be a woman in power. But staying in power? That would demand sacrifice far greater than anyone could imagine. Because in the court of kings and queens, love is weakness, and loyalty is an illusion. The queen and the favorite. Power didn't stop Elizabeth from feeling, and her heart, against all odds, still beat wildly for one man. Robert Dudley. Handsome, charming, loyal. He had known Elizabeth since childhood, and now, as queen, she made him her master of the horse, a title that let him stay close, very close. But there was a problem. Dudley was married. His wife, Amy Robson, suffered from illness, isolated in a distant country house. Then, in 1560, the unthinkable happened. Amy was found dead at the bottom of a staircase. The official verdict? Accidental fall. But the whispers in court? Murder. Arranged. Convenient. Many believed Dudley had orchestrated her death so he could marry the queen. And Elizabeth? She didn't condemn him. She didn't exile him. She kept him close. But she didn't marry him either, because the stakes were too high. Her counselors warned, "If you marry him, we revolt." So Elizabeth made her choice. She wore the crown, but she would never wear the veil, a wedding she never forgave. Though Elizabeth chose duty over love, her heart never stopped watching Robert Dudley. So when news reached her in 1578 that Dudley had secretly married another woman, Lettice Knowles, Elizabeth's own cousin, the Queen's fury knew no bounds. She was humiliated, betrayed. The court trembled as Elizabeth unleashed her wrath. She banished Lettice from court forever, calling her the she-wolf. She refused to acknowledge the marriage until the day she died. And yet, she never truly let go of Dudley. He remained in her favor, perhaps because he was a reminder of the girl she once was, of the love she never let herself claim. Their bond, though fractured, endured until Dudley's death in 1588, when she found the last letter he ever wrote her. Elizabeth kept it in a box beside her bed. She marked it. His last letter. It was more than love. It was a memory. It was the life she might have lived. In another world, with a different crown. The rival queen in chains. If Elizabeth had one mirror, one shadow, it was her cousin. Mary, Queen of Scots. Beautiful, Catholic, royal by blood. To many in Europe, Mary was the rightful Queen of England, not Elizabeth. At first, Elizabeth tried diplomacy. She even offered Mary a husband, Robert Dudley himself, but Mary refused. She chose passion over politics, marrying Lord Darnley, a union that turned toxic. Their relationship spiraled into violence, and in a scandal that shocked Europe, Darnley was murdered in an explosion. The man suspected of orchestrating it? Mary's next husband. Scotland turned against her. Mary fled across the border, seeking protection from Elizabeth. And Elizabeth gave it to her, but not as a guest, as a prisoner. Mary was locked away in castles across England. For 19 years, she played music, wrote letters, waited, and plotted. Because even in chains, Mary remained dangerous. And Elizabeth knew. Sooner or later, one queen would have to fall. A queen's final blow. For nearly 2 decades, Elizabeth kept Mary, Queen of Scots, alive. Not because she trusted her, but because executing a fellow monarch was unthinkable, until it wasn't. In 1586, Elizabeth's spies intercepted a chilling letter. Mary had conspired, yet again, to overthrow Elizabeth and reclaim the throne. This time, there would be no mercy. Elizabeth signed the execution warrant, then hesitated, then claimed she hadn't meant for it to be carried out so swiftly. But it was too late. On February 8, 1587, Mary faced the axe, draped in crimson, the color of martyrdom. She died with dignity. Her last words? "Into thy hands, O Lord." The world was stunned. Some called it justice, others murder. And Elizabeth? She locked herself away for days, grief-stricken, shattered. Whether her regret was political theater or real sorrow, no one ever truly knew. But one thing was certain. With Mary's death, Elizabeth eliminated her greatest rival and guaranteed her place, alone, on England's throne. The queen who defied an empire. Barely a year after Mary's execution, Elizabeth faced a new enemy, one far more dangerous. The Spanish Armada. King Philip II of Spain, Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, was enraged. She had executed a Catholic queen, supported Protestant rebels, and sanctioned English pirates who raided Spanish ships. In 1588, he struck back. 130 Spanish warships, the mightiest naval force in the world, sailed toward England. Panic swept the kingdom. Elizabeth's advisors urged her to hide, to stay safe. But instead, the queen rode out in armor, a silver breastplate over a white dress, and addressed her troops with words carved into legend. "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." The English navy, bolstered by fire ships and rough seas, defeated the Armada. Spain's power cracked. England's pride soared. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. Elizabeth had proven that a woman, unmarried and underestimated, could stand against an empire and win. The myth of the Virgin Queen. In the wake of the Armada, Elizabeth's legend exploded. She wasn't just a monarch. She became a myth. They called her the Virgin Queen, the goddess of peace. Gloriana. Poets compared her to Athena. Artists painted her with celestial orbs, dragons, phoenixes. Every image crafted to show This was no ordinary woman. But behind the masks, Elizabeth was just that, a woman. And she was aging. Her once pale skin was now ravaged by the lead-based makeup she wore daily. Her teeth, yellowed and decayed, made speech difficult. She refused to sit for new portraits. Instead, her painters copied her youthful image again and again. In court, no one dared acknowledge time. Compliments became currency. Elizabeth clung to flattery like a lifeline, choosing advisors not for wisdom, but for praise. And still, she held power. Still, she stood tall. Because even as her body betrayed her, her myth, carefully constructed, remained immortal. She wasn't just ruling England. She was playing a role the world couldn't look away from. Court of masks and manipulation. Behind Elizabeth's regal image was a court full of theater, a daily dance of loyalty, ambition, and flattery. One of her most dangerous favorites? Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. Young, bold, handsome, Elizabeth saw in him a spark of her past, perhaps even a shadow of Dudley. She elevated him quickly, too quickly. Military posts, riches, influence. But Essex was reckless. In 1599, he disobeyed her direct orders and deserted his command in Ireland. The Queen was furious. She stripped him of titles, wealth, his place beside her. Humbled, he begged for mercy. But instead of learning, he plotted. In 1601, Essex launched a desperate, laughable coup attempt. He and a handful of supporters marched on London, hoping the people would rise with them. They didn't. He was arrested within hours. And Elizabeth? She made a decision no heart could make lightly. She signed his death warrant. When Essex was executed, something inside the Queen broke. She had once called him her boy. Now he was gone by her own hand. The cost of power? Loneliness. Always loneliness. The Queen who married a nation. After Essex's death, Elizabeth withdrew deeper into silence. Gone were the witty banquets, the courtly games. In their place, stillness, memory, mourning. One courtier whispered, "She sits in the dark," shedding tears to bewail Essex. But the people still cheered for her, still believed in their queen. When asked about her endless singleness, she gave a now legendary reply. "I am already bound unto a husband, the kingdom of England." It wasn't just rhetoric. It was her truth. Elizabeth had turned marriage into a political weapon. Every suitor was a bargaining chip. Every rejection, a declaration of independence. Her virginity wasn't weakness. It was a strategy. By remaining unmarried, she held total power. No king beside her. No heir to manipulate her. But power had a price. No children. No true confidants. Only portraits and politics to fill the void. In the mirror, she saw not just a queen, but a woman, aging, tired, alone. Yet outside those palace walls, her myth still burned like a beacon. England wasn't just ruled by Elizabeth. I was in love with her. The shadow of Mary never fades. Even as Elizabeth reigned supreme, one ghost never left her side. Mary, Queen of Scots, dead, beheaded, but her bloodline still very much alive. Because Mary had a son, James VI of Scotland. And though Elizabeth had executed his mother, she watched James carefully from afar. He was Protestant, clever, politically cautious, qualities Elizabeth respected, though she never publicly named him heir. She allowed her counselors to court him in secret, sending gifts, letters, promises. Because the truth? Elizabeth had no children, no successor, and she knew that when she died, her myth might die with her, unless she chose the right person to carry the torch. James, ironically, the child of her greatest rival, might be the key to protecting her legacy. So the Virgin Queen, the warrior, the icon, quietly made peace with the bloodline she once tried to erase. Even in death, power demands strategy. The curtain begins to fall. By the early 1600s, Elizabeth was no longer the radiant queen of her portraits. Her hair, once golden, was now a wig of fiery red. Her face, once admired, was hidden behind layers of lead paint. Her smile, long gone, along with her crumbling teeth. But worse than time was loss. One by one, those she trusted most died. Her advisors, her friends, even her ladies-in-waiting. She stopped sleeping. She refused to lie down. She stood for hours, silent, as if afraid that rest meant surrender. Servants described her as drifting, eyes distant, surrounded by old memories and fading grandeur. When asked if she was ill, she whispered, "The soul has its own sickness." The queen who once stared down an empire now stared at shadows. She no longer held counsel, no longer smiled at the court. She simply sat, cloaked in sorrow, draped in velvet, as England watched its sun begin to set. And still, no official heir, no public declaration, only silence and waiting. The Virgin Queen, once the heartbeat of a nation, was fading into stillness, the last breath of a dynasty. March 24th, 1603. Richmond Palace. Early morning. The room was quiet. No crowds, no speeches, just soft footsteps, muffled prayers, and a frail figure on a mountain of silk cushions. Elizabeth I, Queen of England, ruler for 44 years, took her final breath. She was 69. There was no grand farewell, no royal parade of heirs. Instead, her ladies-in-waiting stood watch, some weeping, some whispering stories of her youth, some too stunned to speak. She had left no children, no siblings, no king to follow her. And so, with that final breath, the House of Tudor ended, a dynasty born of war, shaped by scandal, and ruled, at the end, by a woman who never surrendered. But Elizabeth had made a final decision, even if whispered only in private. James VI of Scotland, the son of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, would succeed her, a circle completed, a wound sealed with legacy. The Virgin Queen left no heir of flesh, but she left behind something stronger, a myth. And myths don't die. The letter buried in silence. After her death, Elizabeth's belongings were catalogued. Dresses, jewels, state papers. But deep in her private chambers, hidden among faded scrolls and perfumes, her attendants found something else. A letter, not addressed, not sealed, but worn with age. And at the top, one word scrawled in her own hand. His last letter. It was from Robert Dudley, written shortly before his death in 1588. A simple message of concern, affection, and loyalty. To the world, they had been just close friends. To Elizabeth, he was her secret heartbreak. She had kept the letter for 15 years. Never showed it, never mentioned it, but she always carried it with her, folded into her bed linens, tucked under her pillow, read in the dead of night when no one watched. And now, long after his passing, and hers, there it was, the final echo of a love she never claimed, a wound she never closed, a truth history could only guess it hid, until that letter, proof that even queens bleed quietly, a legacy stitched in silk and smoke. In life, Elizabeth controlled her image like a master painter, carefully crafted, impossibly perfect, thousands of gowns, dozens of wigs. Each outfit has a message, each portrait, propaganda. She became not just a queen, but a symbol. Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, mother of the nation. But beneath the pearls and powdered face, there lived a woman who had once been a neglected child, a threatened prisoner, a survivor of court predators and palace plots. Her strength came not from crowns, but from wounds. She had been called too emotional, too clever, too soft, too cold. She was all of it, and none of it. She led England through rebellions, assassinations, foreign threats, and betrayals. Yet she held the country together through charm, force, brilliance, and raw endurance. And in doing so, she gave birth not just to a golden age, but to a blueprint of how a woman could lead and outlast. Elizabeth didn't just wear the crown, she redefined it. The mirror lies, but history remembers. As Elizabeth aged, her court played a dangerous game. They pretended time stood still. They praised her beauty, though her teeth had rotted. They flattered her grace, though her limbs stiffened with age. They told her she was radiant, even as her body weakened under lead makeup and solitude. And Elizabeth, perhaps, believed them, or needed to believe them, because the mirror, when she dared to look, reflected something cruel. Not just wrinkles, but memories of Anne Boleyn's sharp eyes, of Dudley's smile, of Mary's final breath, of a crown that had never left her head, but had worn her down. To the world, she was still Gloriana, but in private, she sat in darkness, whispering to ghosts. One courtier wrote, she would sit motionless for hours, murmuring of old friends, weeping for the ones she sent away. This wasn't a weakness. It was the cost of greatness. The crown gave her power, but stole her peace. And still, She carried it until the very end, because some women are forged in silence. The queen who became a myth. Elizabeth I passed without fanfare, but her myth only grew. Poets cast her as a goddess. Historians debated her decision. Feminists claimed her as a pioneer. Critics called her manipulative, but no one denied her impact. She died unmarried, childless, and alone. Yet she mothered an empire. She ruled without a king. Yet no king ever cast a longer shadow. Her enemies called her vain, cold, and dangerous, but they feared her because she refused to break. Elizabeth had turned her pain into armor. Her silence turned into strength. Her solitude into sovereignty. Even centuries later, we can't stop talking about her. Not because she was flawless, but because she was human, fierce, wounded, brilliant, alone. A girl whose mother was executed. A woman who outlived every man who tried to rule her. A queen who never knelt. She didn't just shape history, she haunted it. And when we speak her name, we don't just remember the Virgin Queen. We remember the woman beneath the crown, the myth she became, and the truth we're still uncovering. They called her the Virgin Queen, but she was never truly anyone's. Not her father's obedient daughter, not her court's puppet, not her people's fantasy. Elizabeth I was a paradox. A woman who wore armor made of silk, who ruled with both tenderness and terror, who loved deeply, yet let no man define her. She didn't leave behind an heir, but she left behind something greater, a legacy that still challenges us. What does it mean to lead without compromise? To suffer in silence for the sake of a nation? To choose power over comfort, and myths over marriage? If you've ever wondered why history remembers some women louder than others, it's not because they were perfect. It's because they refused to disappear. If Elizabeth were alive today, would we admire her strength? Or question her loneliness? Would we call her powerful? Or simply broken in a way we now understand? You decide. Comment below. What would you have told Elizabeth if you met her before the crown? Would you warn her? Praise her? Or ask her to choose herself over duty? And if her story moved you, share it. Let someone else remember the girl behind the myth, the woman behind the crown. Because maybe, just maybe, we're all still learning how to wear our own clothes.